All right. Well, good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from today. And welcome to our Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I'll be your host for today. If you've been tuning in this month, you know that we started the school year in a big way. We have over 50 live events this month. There's still a few more coming. So if you do head over to exploringbytheseat.com, you can find the events that are coming up. And we are launching our October events this week as well. We're diving into space exploration as well as many other themes. So do head over to the website and check it out. One of our major themes this month has been ocean plastic. We've been talking to scientists, to explorers, to artists around the world who are researching the issue, documenting the issue, as well as looking for solutions. So we're going to continue today by heading over to the UK, and we're going to meet David Rothschild. He is an explorer who's traversed some of the world's toughest environments. His curious spirit has helped give nature a voice and make the world a more sustainable place for the last 2 decades. In 2010, he spent 3 months crossing the Pacific Ocean from San Francisco to Sydney on the Plastiki, a 60-foot recyclable catamaran made using over 12,000 plastic bottles, all to raise awareness about what was going on in the Pacific and the plastic waste crisis. So I'm going to bring David in with us now. Here he is. Hey, David, how are we doing today?
Hello.
Hey, David, we lost you for a second, but it looks like we got you now.
Yeah,
perfect.
I feel like I'm out on the Pacific again. Thank you, Joe, and thanks for having me on board. This incredible platform. It's always nice to be here.
Absolutely. We've been able to steal you the last couple of years to share your stories and you know what you've observed with the plastic crisis, and always a thrill to have you joining us. I'm going to let you take over for a little bit, and then we've got a great group of classrooms right across North America who are going to have lots of questions.
Brilliant. Well, I hope you can all hear me okay. It seems to be a little bit crackly. I'm not sure what happened to our stream. If you can't hear me, Joe, properly, please jump in.
You're coming through nice and clear, so it might just be maybe it's a little slow on your end, but I've got you nice and clear. Nice and clear.
Okay, good. So hopefully you can see this this picture I pulled out of the archive, out of my mum's shoebox under the bed somewhere. I took a photo of it. I wanted to really start actually by just sort of going back to where my journey began, because I look back now at this life that I've been living and the journeys that I've been able to go on, and the places I've been able to see, and the people I've been able to meet, and the expeditions that I've joined or created, and stories that have been shared. And I have to pinch myself. And often one of the questions that gets asked is, how do you become an explorer? And what does that mean? And I think it all begins here. No, not in the garden with a bad hairdo. But it all begins when we're at that very informative young age, which sadly I'm not at anymore, but all of you will be. We're all born to explore. We're all born explorers. And the system that we jump into, the school system and the system of life, the people we surround ourselves with, the way we interact with the world, the media we read, the things we consume, the groups we play in, the sports we follow, the books we read, all of those make up the tapestry of who we are. And that process sometimes, unfortunately, teaches us maybe what we can't do, and rather than focusing on what we can do. And so from my standpoint, when I hear someone reading out this, bio of what I've done or where I've been, I always feel A, rather embarrassed, but B, I go back to where it all began. And I think it's really important when you're starting out on this life journey to never question the fact that you are just as much an explorer as me or anybody else that you might see on this series. So never doubt yourself, follow your conviction, believe in the stories that you're going to create, because they have the capacity to change the world. I never thought that the stories that I was going to create would have some of the impact that they've had. And so to be able to share these with you, hopefully will inspire you. I've done loads of stuff, as Joe was saying. I skied across the South Pole. This was me looking very cold at a very early age. Head down for many months. One of the great things about being an explorer is you get to eat lots of bits and pieces that we're not allowed to eat on a regular basis, maybe in so much, so nuts and chocolate, power bars and stuff. So when anyone says to me, what's it like to be an explorer? It's like, you get to eat lots of sweets and good stuff that keeps you moving through these icy terrains. This is me at the South Pole. The North Pole in 2006, actually. And the reason I'm saying this is because when I was up in the North Pole, yes, there was polar bears, and we did see them, and they are incredible creatures that really do scare you. You feel very, very small by the environment anyway, and then you see these incredibly curious, beautiful creatures that just actually want to eat you. And I was traveling with 16 dogs, and there was 4 of us on the expedition. So I always said we were like 4 nice bits of steak and 16 cocktail sausages walking across somebody's front lawn or backyard. But the thing that struck me the most when I was up in the Arctic was, one, seeing human fingerprints, the biggest one being a changing climate, and this was in 2006, seeing so much more open water than was ever read about or discussed about, and seeing this incredibly changing climate. But also the human fingerprints of waste popping up in the Arctic, little bits of plastic turning up on the ice where there should be nothing. And this started me, to start thinking about, this is one of our dogs on that trip. These are the guys we traveled with. This was this incredible journey at the pole, but it started to get me into this idea of thinking about, plastics. In 2006, when I returned from the Arctic, this was at a point where plastics weren't necessarily being discussed as they are today. Thankfully, they are being discussed. People are starting to provide solutions. But at that point, it was a very early the conversation. And so for me, what I wanted to do was to try and take these out of sight, out of mind places like the Arctic that we were seeing. Gesundheit. Sorry. Seeing these flecks of plastic and reading about plastic accumulating in our ocean through these obscure reports. I wanted to take these out of sight, out of mind moments and notes and information and bring it into the mainstream. And I think that's sort of where, coming back to this idea of being explorer, it all begins, where you say, could I build a boat entirely out of plastic bottles? I started looking at the items that were turning up in our oceans and around, and they were all the kind of things that you probably find still today, sadly. A lot of what I would call these disposable, single-use plastics that we use for a matter of seconds, that take a huge amount of energy and resource to make, mainly made from oil, and then they get thrown out into either if they're lucky, into some sort of recycling facility or a landfill, if they're lucky. But generally, they end up getting pushed into the natural environment. And so I started reading and looking and thinking, well, how do we change that perception? How do we stop looking at the sort of disposability of these things and actually look at the usability of these things? And I think that's a really big segue for how we view the material. I think there is still a narrative today that plastic is this awful material and that we must get rid of it completely. But the reality is, it's an evolutionary material that's allowed us to live a life of modernity in some ways that have helped us, to move around the planet, or helped us with trade, or it's helped us to keep things fresh, or it's helped us with medical devices. It's helped us with the very communication devices that we're on now. So plastic, when it's used correctly, when it's designed correctly, when it is reused correctly, is an incredibly malleable, brilliant material that can be many things. It's infinite potential. Our imagination and the way we view it is finite potential. We view it because we want to pick it up. We view it as a thing that's disposable. And often a lot of the plastic that we come into contact with on a daily basis is viewed that way, as waste, not as a resource. And this became a very big mantra for me. The bottle was one of the things that I really started to look at as a kind of exemplifier of throwaway, sort of single-use society. Here is this idea of making and blowing and extruding this big plastic bottle that was using a ton of water, a ton of oil. About a quarter of the bottle, or a 2-liter bottle, is actually oil in its production. All those chemicals and then we pour liquid in it. We transport it all the way over the world. Often it sits on a shelf for a couple of years, and then we come along, we grab it, we consume it maybe in an hour, maybe in 10 minutes, whatever it might be, and then we throw it. And so this became the sort of cornerstone of this project, the Plastiki that Joe was mentioning, that was really saying, can we build a boat entirely of materials, PET, which is makes of the plastic, and sail across the Pacific? So in 2007, the sketch was done. Seems like an age. It is an age ago now. And I'm aging myself. This was the first sketch we did of the vessel. And as everyone, when they see this, often asks me, is like, what was that you were designing? Is this a, you know, a floating hotel, like a floating ferry? Like what? I look at it now and I laugh, but I do look at it and see some of the elements that we sketched into this initial design, like down on the bottom there, the dolphins pulling us for power, or the, you know, the bottles in the sail, making sure that the sail was made from reclaimed, recycled materials. And in the end, thankfully, some of those things came to fruition. So while it was crazy, it was actually really important, I think, to translate that idea into something visual. And then that's when the adventure actually began. We obviously spent a lot of time trying to engineer and figure out how could we build a boat made of entirely plastic bottles to sail to this area in the ocean, which is called the Eastern Garbage Patch. At the time, we only thought there was one. It shows you how much we've progressed. We now know that there is 5 or even 8, they call them gyres. These are current, you know, convergence of currents in the oceans where natural currents pull together, these Gulf streams and these natural current streams, they pull together areas which often sailors want to avoid, called the doldrums. These are these flat areas where plastic accumulates, where there's no wind. And the best way to describe it, I still haven't found another better way. If you're ever in a jacuzzi and you've got all this bubbling mess going on, it's always a little bit in the middle that's kind of, actually, if you notice, a bit static, and you can't understand why. That is the same effect. So we have this massive bubbling mess of plastic going around the ocean, and then it sort of congregates in one area. So we'd read about this, and we wanted, as I said, to design this vessel. We used a ton of different inspirations for the design. In this slide, you can see some of the inspirations we took from nature. The pomegranate was an inspiration in terms of how we could pack the hull out. We had influence from things like the Namibian fog basking beetle, that little thing down on the bottom there, which was really, I think, a great example of how nature-inspired design comes to fruition. Like this little beetle lives in the Namibian desert, captures water on the back of its shell, leans forward and can create water from nothing in one of the most hostile environments in the world. So we were like, could we use that to you know, capture water as we sailed across the Pacific? But as we started to test things, we realized that actually we were very far away. This was a design project, so we had to figure out how to keep all these bottles, which were meant to be only in their original form. We didn't want to melt them down, in a line. How could we build a craft that could actually manage to not get twisted up like a piece of licorice, but could actually be you know, used in a way that would give it structural integrity? So we, in the end, made this as one of our first mock-ups. This was one of the boats that we tested on the bay in San Francisco. You'll notice that the frame, the blue bit, is actually a wood frame. So we had to build it out of wood initially. But we were really trying to test, could this concept of bottles give us the right float, the buoyancy? Could we use it in a way? Could we sail it? Was it actually going to be sailable, or would it be, you know, what we ended up calling it, a boat raft? And really, would we be only able to follow the currents as it took us, which was actually how it ended up being most of the time. One of the big things about the Plastiki project was, again, looking at the materials and understanding what materials could we use, what materials would tell the story, and what materials would be able to hopefully go on and have an impact in society. So when you're in it, sometimes you don't have that clarity, which 10 years of being able to look back and absorb gives us a little bit of perspective. But at the time, it was very overwhelming how we were actually going to make this thing work. As you can see, we actually ended up doing something quite cool, which was we took a if you see here in the middle 2 images, this is in our rental flat. We were you know, cooking up vacuum packed plastic, you know, to try and figure if we can make this ball damage structure, which was this foam up in the top corner there. You can see on the top left hand corner this sandwich material to try and make the structure out of PET, out of plastic bottles, which is what we ended up doing. So you can see there was 12,500 plastic bottles in that huge pile. All of them had to be cleaned and washed they became our flotation chambers. And then the superstructure was this other polymer, which was also PET, but it was a new way of using it. We used it in a way that was actually using its own structure to basically keep its structural integrity. So we actually had a new material or a new way of using the material that came out of this project, which was a self-reinforcing textile. So the textile itself is made of PET, but inside it had different weaves. So when you melted it, there was a melt point that was hit some of the fibers, and that was your matrix, and that would melt. And then the other fibers, which gave you strength, they had a higher melt point, and that gave you structure, your actual integrity, so that the thing could be stiff enough to carry the bottles, but also stiff enough to hold the shape of the boat that we wanted to build. Again, we didn't know if this was possible, and borrowed massive ovens like that big picture in the middle there, creating huge frames to see if we can make cross beams. This was me spending many hours with Andy, our boat builder, and Tom, who was part of the team, to try and figure out these methods would work. Would they stay together? We used to label things up A and B and stick them in salt water or drag them across the floor of our workspace. And it was definitely a very tense moment. I think this was probably me looking down at one of the latest innovations and how to create a live hinge or something, and me going, I hope this works, what do you think? And Andy rubbing his hands, as he always did, on the left there, very positive, and Tom on the side there always being a little bit probably going, I'm not sure about it, because but it was a team effort, and I think that's one of the big things that comes out of Plastiki. It really was a team effort. There was a lot of people involved. This is just a small few, because it really was a project for everybody. It was a community project that was focusing on how to tell a story that hadn't been told through loads of different, viewpoints. And so the Plastiki was a vessel that was made entirely of plastic bottles with superstructure made entirely of PET, the very material plastic bottles are made from. So yes, it was a sailing project, but it was also an ocean project. It was also an engineering project. It was also an adventure story. It was also a story of the unknown and innovation and design. It was a story of biomimicry. It was a story of prose, and it was poetic, and we had people writing poems about us as pirates and all these other things. And so it was a very sort of broad story that allowed multiple entry points. So if you were a sailor, you'd be fascinated by it. If you were a engineer, you'd be fascinated by it. If you were both, you were really fascinated by it. So it really had a potential to capture people's imagination, which meant we got a ton of people helping support the project. And very quickly we realized that this was everybody's project, because plastic accumulating in our ocean is not my problem. It's not just your problem. It's everybody's problem. It's a problem that we all have to work towards solving as a collective unit. This was after many years of engineering designs, blood, sweat, and tears, lots of crying, lots of failures. This was the Plastiki being lowered into the water at the end of 2009. This was December 2009. I remember this day well. We picked it up in the air. Finally, we got to look at the bottles all stacked underneath. Every single bottle being cleaned by hand, washed, filled with CO2 powder to give it some strength. So if you imagine you shake up a fizzy drink without taking the lid off, you get that real tense feeling in the bottle. You can't actually quite crush it. And then you take the lid off and it explodes. It's that release of carbon, that gas. So we did that, but without any fluid inside. So all the bottles were under pressure, similar to that of a car tire, about 36 pounds per square inch. And they formed this sort of rigid structure around the center beam, these big long boards that were also made, as I said, of PET. So by the time we got to putting her in the water, by early 2010, we were already testing her in the bays of San Francisco, which obviously created a bit of a scene. Lots of people were fascinated to find out what we were up to. Here we were sailing along, using the bottles in their original form. It obviously set the sailing community in San Francisco into fits of laughter. Everybody was convinced that we wouldn't even make it out of the gate. Everyone was telling us we're idiots. Why are you bothering? Just, go take it to the recycling bin. There was a lot of negativity from the sailing community, or skepticism, I should say. Everyone was thought it was quite ridiculous. It was novel. It was, who is this person? And listen, I couldn't sail at the time. I'm still not a sailor. I'm someone who can sit on a boat and navigate, point and pull up, head sail and do all those things. But a sailor is someone who spends many, many years at sea understanding the ocean. So Hardened sailors were probably very skeptical, because they can understand the rigors that, you know, and the testing of the vessel that was going to go through on this epic journey, which wasn't just to go to the Eastern Garbage Patch. It ended up being that we were going to go to Australia, right across the Pacific Ocean on a huge, you know, it was ended up being 11,000 kilometers. So the vessel itself, in the end, was our home. There was a crew of 6 of us, 3 of us for the whole time. We would take it in turns to sit at the back of the boat. We were totally self-sufficient. We put solar panels on the back. We had our own garden on the back. You can see it there, living garden. In the bottom picture there, just about, you can see it. And though we didn't have any, you know, our assistance or our mode of moving was all done through either solar or through for communication, but was done through wind only. So we really were at the mercy of nature, at the ocean. And we set off on the spring equinox in March, and 20 on this journey. I remember it being very cold and creeping along at a very slow speed. But as we started to move further south, there's a better image of the garden on the right there in the bottom. We would get, you know, the sun would come out and sitting there on the boat, bobbing around. And then you really did want it to move faster. You know, when it was cold, you didn't want it, you know, you were like, come on, let's get warm. And when it was warm, you wanted it to be cold again. Classic story of, you know, the grass is always greener. But when you're bobbing around only at 1 knot in the middle of the Pacific and it's really, really hot, it was quite a dramatic event. Here is the bottles from underneath that you can see. We would often jump into the water to the hypnotic blue and swim around just to check that everything was still in one piece under the vessel itself, that we weren't losing bottles, that the structure wasn't cracking. And it was probably one of the most humbling experiences that I've ever had, of being in the middle of nowhere in the Pacific. Probably, you know, there was one moment, there's a point called the, you know, the point of inaccessibility, where you're the furthest from any land, and really you are when you're in the middle of the Pacific. And we actually marked it on our GPS, and we all dove in. There was a rope off the back to make sure that we could swim to the boat, because actually even 1 knot of drift is quite fast, and we didn't want to leave anybody behind, because turning around obviously was clearly going to be an issue. But this like hypnotic blue, where you just wanted to dive deeper and deeper and deeper into this ocean. And then looking around, seeing, you know, the bottles were okay, but then I remember seeing distinctly these flecks. And at first I thought they might be, you know, tiny little salps or little, you know, filter feeders. And then I realized actually what we were looking at were flecks of plastic that had photodegraded, and they were just floating through the light layer of the ocean, which is where the life lives in our ocean. So that top layer of the ocean, where we get all these filter feeders who are actually sucking in water, were clearly then sucking in pieces of plastic. And that to me then really, you know, confirmed that we were living with not just a eyesore, a problem that was turning up on our beaches, but here was something that was affecting the entire food system, from the very smallest of species all the way up to us when we consume, you know, fish, or we consume, you know, other products from the ocean. This was ending up in the food system. Some people say to me, well, I don't eat fish, I only eat meat. Well, a lot of meat in factories, unfortunately, is fed fish meal. That fish meal is taken obviously from the ocean. So you're exposed to this toxicity of the plastic flecks into the food system. And this is where the health conversation of plastics in our environment come in, not to mention the devastating impact on marine life, which is obviously now becoming exponential. If you're a whale, it's pretty likely that your stomach now is filling with plastic on a daily basis, because of the way that you have to try and get nutrients, which is you often with your mouth wide open, cruising through the life layer of the ocean. And that requires, unfortunately, or that creates, unfortunately, this problem. So life at sea is an incredible place to be. You're always kept on your toes. It was 24 hours a day. We were sort of a hodgepodge crew of filmmakers, activists, sailors, photographers, artists, storytellers, and you know, everything is up and down, literally, figuratively and metaphorically. You know, there was good days and bad days. There was days where you felt overwhelmed. There was days where you felt on top of the world. For me, being on the ocean for that long was truly probably one of the most incredible moments of my life, and the gift to be able to share that live. We had communication from the boat, so we could go live like we are now and talk to classrooms and individuals and organizations around the world at the time when there really wasn't a conversation around plastic. So the Plastiki was really our home. We were, living on this kind of message on a bottle experience. It was very much a experience. I think, we were really, exemplifying or felt like really we were on spaceship Earth on our microcosm. The ocean at night, especially when the stars were shining bright down onto the ocean, you couldn't tell if you were on the sky or on the ocean. It was just this sort of everything blended into one. And you were sort of sailing on this little platform, and you have to conserve your waste and your food and your water, and everything was kind of, very contained. And that really was a metaphor as well for how we have to live on this spaceship, and how all systems need to work in harmony for it to be harmonious. If one system gets out of whack, you'd run out of water, then you're going to run out of food. If you run out of food, you got real trouble. If you have too much food, you get waste. If you get waste, you have real issues. And everything is interdependent, interrelated, as is our plastic issue. So we went on this journey, as I said, from San Francisco to Sydney. After many, many months at sea, this was me popping up to this very overwhelming bank of people, shoving microphones in our faces and asking us, had we solved the plastic problem and what was next? This fascination with what was new and what is next. And the reality was, no, we hadn't solved anything. But what we had done is work together as a team of individuals coming together as a family, inspired by a mission to raise a story or raise a narrative that would have an impact on the way we viewed this material. Our story changed dramatically during the many years it took us to build the project and to undertake the journey, and our understanding of the material, its limitations, and that was really, I look back now over the last 11 years and even further back from when it first ever started, even my own perception of the problem and how we can solve it and what we're involved in and what we need to do has shifted, and it shifts the whole time, sometimes in a positive way. Because of solutions that I keep reading about or meeting people who are doing some incredible things with polymers now and closed loop recycling and all these things that are coming out. But the other side is very disheartening, which is that we're still producing a ton of throwaway single-use plastics. So again, in your everyday life, if you're wondering, these are the things that are the most common throwaway items: the takeaway foods, the plastic bags, the reusable bottles. Especially now, sadly, we're in the middle of a pandemic, or we're still in the middle of something that doesn't seem that it's going to disappear anytime soon. And we've got, a lot more disposability in our lives: disposable masks, disposable gloves. Everybody's obviously using things once and throwing them out. But these do, we could find reusable alternatives easily that are sustainable and that can be used over and over. And I think that is the biggest thing, is that we have to tackle our disposability as much as we tackle the issue of plastic. So if we can find the balance for those, then we can, I think ultimately we can find a solution. So going back to you, Joe, in the studio, but just to say, we're all born to explore. We must all remain curious. I hope you've enjoyed that little conversation, and now I would love to answer any questions if people have questions for me.
All right. Well, David, thank you so much. I think that's, oops.
There you go.
There we go. I think that's such a, a great message, that we are all explorers. We can all be curious. We can all look for solutions from anywhere. So I think that's really important for the students who are joining us today, because we do have students joining us from a lot of great and different locations. So I am going to jump right into the Q&A, because like I mentioned, we've got a great group of classrooms. If you're tuning in with us via YouTube, you can use that comment section and put in a few questions. But let's jump into some of our camera classrooms. So make sure I pick the right one there. There we go. Let's start off with Mrs. Oak's crew. They're joining us in Minnesota, some fourth graders in Eden Prairie. Let's bring them in now. There they are. Hey, Miss Oaks.
Hi, we have questions for you.
Awesome.
Fantastic.
Does plastic float under the ground, or do animals eat it on the land?
Is it just a water issue?
So plastic is one of these materials that is a sort of a great example of progress, human progress. And we created this material. It was actually created originally. It was called Bakelite, and it was created as something cool that would last. And just how well it would last, I don't think anyone anticipated. So when we created this material, it really doesn't go away. So we've created it to last forever. So it does stay in our atmosphere. It does float in the ocean. It gets smaller in the ocean. It breaks down and breaks down and breaks down through a thing called degradation. In other words, it gets really like hit by the sun. The UV comes down and hits it. The salt water hits it. And what that does is it makes the molecules in plastic incredibly soft. And if you ever find plastic on a beach that's being exposed to those elements, if you rub it between your fingers, what you'll notice is it crumbles like fine powder, like sugar or like flour. And that there is where the issue really lies. So it may not seem that we've got plastic in our ocean, because when you look out at the ocean, if you have the opportunity to look out at an ocean or a river, yes, you may see plastic accumulating on the edges and on the banks of the river, or on the, the beach, the lake, on the lakeside and all that. But actually in the ocean or in those lakes, from those waterways, we're seeing these microplastics that are actually getting down to really, really small sizes, about the size of a human hair in thickness, and 1 micron or less. And that becomes very, very challenging. So they never disappear, and they're somewhere in our atmosphere, sadly. Good question.
All right, let's jump to another live classroom here. We're going to go to some 7th graders hanging out with Miss Roach. I believe they're in Virginia, but they'll correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure. Let's bring them in. Hey, 7th graders.
Hey.
Oh, can you grab the mic for me?
Yep. All right, okay, we're ready.
No, we're on, yeah.
So,
I get.
do you still explore to raise awareness? Are you kind of are you kind of staying where you are for now?
Could you hear?
Oh,
Wait, what?
you said, do I still explore?
Yeah.
That's what I heard, correct?
Yes. Yeah. Do you still explore? Do explorations? What else?
For raising awareness.
To raise awareness.
Yeah, yes, I do. Sorry, the old version of the internet just closed out on me. I got a wave of nothing came over, but I got the gist of it. Yes, I do. I'm still doing a number of explorations and programs. We're about to launch a new program, actually, which we're working on to raise awareness around mental health and access to nature. It's called Rewild Yourself. We'll be launching that next month. So that will bring together 2 of the things that I feel most passionate about, which is health and wellness, and nature and environment. So those 2 worlds will come together. So yeah, still a lot of exploration. We're trying to get the Plastiki on the road again. There's a possibility of me trying to get her to sail again and do a tour to bring some of the awareness that we've learned over the last 11 years back online. So exploration is, for me, has broadened, I think, in its context. I think we're all explorers. The moment that we start to learn something new, jump into something that makes us feel a little bit uncomfortable, because I think we're creatures of habit. We love to do things, in routine, and that's what's programmed into us, to be routine. But sometimes when you break that routine, or you break your comfort zone, then the exploration begins. And so I think exploring is not just physical anymore, and it's also mental, and it's stretching your imagination to try and explore new ways, looking at the world and think about our role within it.
All right, and I'm going to share a link here for voicefornature.com if you want to dive a little bit deeper into some projects and such. Okay, where should we go now? We are going to go to Miss Ross's crew. They're joining in Canada, Tavistock, Ontario. Some 4th and 5th graders. Let's bring them in. I see someone front and center. How are we doing?
Good. My question is, in the 2100s, will the ocean still be a thing, or will it be all polluted?
Well, I want to hope that it will still very much be a thing. The ocean, we live on planet Ocean. So if we don't have an ocean, then it's going to be very hard for us to survive on this planet. So we need it. It's a symbiotic relationship between everything that is important. The pollution that we're seeing accumulating in our atmosphere through obviously the burning of fossil fuels is very much coming back down into our oceans now. So I think we've got a few major issues to deal with, but I think we can break them down into buckets. And I think as individuals, we have to start being aware that every second breath we take comes from the ocean. We have to be aware that, billions of people every day are reliant upon the ocean for protein. We have to be aware that hundreds of millions of people live right next to the oceans. So when we talk about sea level rise, or we talk about species loss in the ocean, or we talk about increased toxicity in the ocean, all of these things have an impact, not just where they are, but across the whole system. So I think it may seem like an endless horizon, that it's an infinite space that we can continue to throw things in there without there being any implications of those things coming back to us. But I think clearly now we're starting to see that that's not the case, and we have the data now. So the thing that excites me the most, though, is that we have the tools available to observe the ocean like never before. We have submersibles that can go to the bottom of the deepest parts of our ocean. We have drones that can go high above the ocean and track currents. We've got low orbit satellites. We've got autonomous vehicles or boats sailing around the ocean now that are starting to track different measurements like salinity or toxicity or pH and all these things that we never had before. So there are a lot of tools coming online that allow us to read and understand those systems like never before, where I think previously we didn't have access to that data or understanding. So that makes me optimistic. But it has to be everybody or nobody. You know, it's this idea that if they do it, then we'll be all right. No, it's not them. It's not this person over here or that organization over there. It is everyone. It's your voice is just as important in the conversation as my voice or Joe's voice or anybody else on this feed or anyone else around the world. I mean, we all have to try, if we have the time, which we should try and make the time to try and jump into these conversations, be active. So I'm positive that we'll find solutions. I'm positive that the ocean will give us those answers if we're just willing to listen to nature and the ocean.
All right, great question from Mrs. Ross's crew. We're going to shift over to Brookville. Miss Allen has some 4th and 5th graders hanging out with us. Let's bring them in. How we doing, Brookville?
We're doing great.
Hi, Brookville.
Oh, come on over here, Isaac. Yep, there you are.
Hi, Isaac.
Hi.
Ask your question.
Do you know when the garbage patch started?
So it's a very good question. I don't think anybody has an exact date when it started. What I would say is that waste in our ocean probably started the moment we moved away from naturally absorbent materials, natural materials that could go back into the system. So if you think about nature, it produces a ton of waste every cycle, but that waste is used as nutrition. So when a tree sheds its leaves, if it does during the winter, we're moving into winter, you probably see the fall happens and everything starts to change, everything drops off. All of that is considered waste, those leaves. But they hit the soil, they create mulch, they create nutrients for the soil that then help the tree to grow, to be stronger, to create food for it. And then the leaves come out again, and then they synthesize all the energy. So you've got this closed loop cycle of all this waste in the natural system that is natural and can move back into the system, either as energy or nutrients, or as both. And what happens with plastics and other synthetics that are man-made, that have been made for consumption, disposability, that have been made to last, is that they just will accumulate somewhere in our environment. So I would probably hazard a guess that plastics in the ocean has really been around as long as plastics were created. So the beginning of the 1900s, I would say probably it ramped up during the Second World War in the 1940s. That's where a lot of these plastics were actually used for military applications. And then I think really the big boom in disposability was especially in the US and in Canada and around the world really was probably in the late 60s and 70s, where the disposable age really arose. The idea of throwing stuff out, use it once, convenience trumped all, and there was always this idea that we could just throw stuff and it would go to a place called away. But we now know that away is not away and that it lasts forever. So say that we've been living alongside plastics in our natural environment for a very, very long time. Unfortunately, we're only now becoming much more aware of them because the planet cannot hide it anymore as well as it did. And so we're really starting to see that impact of it coming back directly to us on our oceans, on our beaches, in our riverways. There's not a moment I don't see a story somewhere where somebody is finding, vast amounts of human consumption. So I hope that answers that.
All right, absolutely. I love the way you say that, away, like it's a place. There is no away.
There is no way. There is no way.
Yeah. Mrs. Parrish's crew in Petrolia, some grade 6-7s. How are we doing today?
Awesome. Braden's got a question for you.
All right, Braden.
Right there, Red.
Hello. My question is, how much food did you have to bring on your journey? For how many people?
So food, we had, as you saw, the garden on the back. So we planned on growing a lot of our own food. We worked with the farmers markets and the farmers in the Bay Area in San Francisco, where we're setting up the project to effectively work with us on nutrition for the journey. So we packed around 100 days worth of supplies. That's what we were anticipating. So a lot of stuff was just in jars. We try to grow a lot of stuff. We were trying to grow sprouts and beans and mung beans, and we had a lot of the kales and chards and things like that on the garden. But most of it was a pre-packed. We spent a lot of time. Jo, our skipper, she was like really into that. That was one of the things that she really wanted to get into. So she would go off on the weekends and drag us along. We'd go foraging, and then we would make delicious dishes that would be then canned. So we would can them ourselves, and it was finding out what was, because of the cycle of how long it took us to build. We went through a few cycles or seasons, I should say. So we would get some of the the spectrum of food, so we could eat a little bit of that San Franciscan farmers market food. So the other side of it was we knew that we were going to have to stop and resupply. So we stopped, obviously, in a number of locations as we bobbed across the Pacific. Some of those locations we stopped in weren't necessarily where we wanted to stop, but we would just say, I can't go around it. We stopped. Had to actually make repairs. So we often picked up some supplies there as well along the way. But it was, about 100 days worth of food we anticipated. We also thought we would be able to fish for food along the way. And sadly, we didn't really see a huge amount of marine life. It sort of split the team a little bit on, whether or not we should be fishing. It was probably 2 fish that we caught the whole journey, which is quite sad, really, when you think about how, if you read, some of the old stories of adventurers like the Plastiki, when they were crossing in the 40s, they talked about this abundance in the ocean and how the ocean was full of marine life and bubbling up everywhere. Everywhere you looked, you couldn't but help see something bubbling through the water, whether it be sharks or whales or fish or flying fish, and an abundance of life was the sort of line I remember. And I think for me, the shocking thing was just how empty the ocean felt.
All right. Well, David, I think we have enough time. We've started something new this year since September, playing little rounds of Kahoot with the classrooms to see how well they were paying attention during the presentation. So I've got a little quiz up and ready here, and I can see some students with their computers already ready. So I'm going to pop the link up here where you can join. So it's just here, kahoot.it. It's going to ask you for a pin, and conveniently enough, I'm going to pop one on the screen in just a moment. If you have one-to-one technology in your classroom, that's amazing. You can play on that. Or your teacher can pop it up at the front of the classroom, and you can shout out your answers and play as a class. Or worst comes to worst, just shout your answers out if you can't get connected in time. So let me share my screen here really quickly, and we'll get that Kahoot up on the screen. There we go. And let's load that up. So all questions you should be able to answer if you are listening in today. The pin number is going to load right now for you. Here it comes. There we go. 934-6531. So we'll give a few moments for some classrooms to join in live with us. As we wait for some players, there we go. They're coming in now. 20 seconds for each question. There'll be 4 questions. It's multiple choice. Of course, you get points if the answer is correct. The quicker you can get that correct answer in, the more points you're going to get. If you answer really fast and it's wrong, well, you're left with nothing. So take a moment to think about those questions there. So lots of students starting to join us right now. Maybe another 30 seconds before we take the quiz live. All right, I think we can kick things in here. Here we go. First question coming up. 20 seconds on the clock. All right, how many plastic bottles made up Plastiki? Was it 5,000, 10,000, 12,500, or was it 20,000 plastic bottles? So that popped up a couple of times in the intro. Then David mentioned it as well. About how many bottles made up the Plastiki? All right, most went with 12,500. Great job. We're going to slide into our next question here, but we'll see the leaderboard. Mateo M is holding it down. Let's see if that lasts. Question 2 coming up. What is plastic mainly made from? Was it plants? Was it oil? Was it cloth fibers? Or was it glass? What was plastic mostly made up of? Couple more seconds. All right, most went with oil. And the leaderboard staying the same there. Mateo holding down the top. So let's jump into question 3. How many gyres are collecting plastic in the ocean? Now, I know David did mention there could potentially be more, but he did give us a number. Was it 5? Was it 3? Was it 10? Or was it 1? All right, most went with 5. That is what you'll see. You know, most will mention that there's 5, but as David mentioned, there could be even more spots, and likely are more spots where the plastic is accumulating in areas like that. And Kath from Miss Roach's class, I believe, has jumped into the lead. And let's wrap up with our final question. Anything can happen with our final question. When Plastiki crossed the Pacific, where was their destination? Was it Hong Kong, Fiji, Australia, or was it in New Zealand? There's a picture of a lovely sailing boat, not the Plastiki, but still a lovely ocean sailboat. All right, good job. Most went with Australia. Let's see how things finish off here for us. 3rd place, we had Wade. Good job, Wade. Jude H holding down our 2nd position. And our big winner, Kath from Miss Roach's class, I believe, held down that top spot. Awesome. Well, again, great job, everybody. We love getting that little interactive quiz in. The students have a lot of fun with it. Let me get rid of that screen share there. I want to start off with a big shout out to our YouTube crew. Thank you for sending in some great questions and being with us today. To our live camera classrooms, it's incredible to see more and more classrooms coming back into the classroom. It's great to peer into your little world for a little bit. And thank you for your great questions. David, as always, thank you so much for the work you do, the work you're continuing to do to raise awareness and be that voice for nature. And thanks for spending some time with our classrooms today.
Amazing. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, everyone out there. Keep up all the good work. As Joe said, it's amazing to be able to share these stories with all of you. And don't forget that you're all explorers. So I look forward to the next time.
All right, let's pop those classrooms in really quickly. A big goodbye and thank you. Thanks so much, classrooms. Thanks for taking part today. All right. Thanks, everyone. We're going to sign off for today.
Bye, guys. Woo.